Dave Altun, United States Marine Corps, Vietnam. Dave is one of my veterans featured in my film Vietnam Remembered. I was fortunate to meet him, interview him. He was at our premiere showing in Wichita, Kansas in 2006. I interviewed him in Wichita on November 15, 2006. Dave served with the 3rd Platoon, Lima Company, 3rd Battalion, 7th Marines, 1st Marine Division as an 0311 Rifleman, PFC, in Vietnam. Tells a great story, folks. Another one of these just raw, real stories of Vietnam. I mean, there's no glamour in war, and I've never been after the blood and guts of war, but you can imagine the stories that have been told me over the years, and you're hearing a lot of them. There's some of you out there that have heard a lot of my stories. I've probably heard all of them, and I'm continuing to upload them as I can. I want to thank Armin Harris, United States Marine Corps retired. God bless you, Armin. I salute you. Merry Christmas. Thank you for sponsoring this story and your continued support of my work. I want to look in this camera and say I really appreciate it, and Semper Fi. Have a great Christmas. Okay, folks, if you'd like to get involved, take ownership in one of my veterans, please. There's many of the stories I've done over the years. Contact me. There's information in the video description, in the comment section of the video, and on my website, larrycapetto.com, sponsor a vet. You hear me say it every time, but freedom's not free, folks. Freedom's earned, and our veterans are the reason we have our freedoms today. Although we're losing our freedoms today, we need to fight for our freedoms today, just like our veterans did. So this series is so important. I know a lot of you are out there, you've been blessed and touched. I just encourage you to please consider becoming a sponsor. Okay, let's go with that. Feel free to share the videos, subscribe to this channel, and let's keep this thing going, folks. I appreciate you watching. I really do. I don't take it for granted. And I thank God for these veterans who are here to tell their stories and who were here on this earth. They're gone now, but it's history being made and history being learned from, okay? God bless you, people. Okay, you're in Vietnam in what, 67?
From latter part of July 67 to March of 68.
Were you drafted?
No, I enlisted in the Marine Corps.
Tell me what you remember about just the mood of the country or the sentiment of the country towards Vietnam and your thoughts about Vietnam before you decided to enlist.
Most of the people I knew at that time, including family, supported the war. And there was a lot of support for me when I went into the service. There wasn't a lot of, I wasn't aware of a lot of protesting of the war at that point. We all grew up very patriotic and thought we were doing our share. Sure. And it wasn't until later on, after I'd been in Vietnam for a while and we got some replacements, that I started hearing about the protests back in the States.
How old were you when you enlisted then?
18.
18, so this is your first time off, probably out of the country, or?
Oh yes, yeah.
And you came from, where were you born at, your hometown?
Newton, Kansas.
So you came from Newton, Kansas to boot camp?
Yeah, in San Diego.
Yeah. And then, did you know that you were going to go to Vietnam?
There wasn't much doubt. In fact, the recruiter, I enlisted here in Wichita, and the recruiter that signed me up was real honest with me and told me step by step what was going to happen, and that I'd probably end up in Vietnam, you know, and which I expected. I didn't think there was. I thought everybody was going to Vietnam.
Did that scare you at all, or were you pretty Gung-ho about the whole
Apprehensive is a better word, I think. I was well trained. I felt like I could do what was expected of me, but I was still apprehensive about when the shooting started.
Did the Marine Corps history play any part of maybe why you joined, the pride or like Iwo Jima or battles like that, or was it just a family thing or just a duty to serve your country?
Well, for me, it was just I was attracted to the pretty blue uniform and the history of the Marines, and I also felt like if I had to go to Vietnam, I wanted to get the best training I could get, and the only place I could get that was in the Marines.
Yeah, that's what I've heard, and that's probably what gets you through the tough times, I'm assuming.
I think it saved my life.
Yeah. The training?
Yes.
Yeah. Was boot camp difficult for you?
Marine boot camp at that time was really tough. I understand that they've changed it a lot now, but back then it was pretty tough, and it was a personal challenge, I think, for myself to get through it. And I did. I got through boot camp, you know. I look back on it now with a lot of pride.
Well, tell me, let's talk about going to Vietnam. What do you remember about going in country the first time you did? Was it what you thought it would be geography-wise, or just the smells, or the sights? What did you experience when you first got off that plane or ship in Vietnam?
Well, I really didn't know what to expect. At landing, when we left Okinawa, the pilot gave us instructions on what to do if we were shot down over the South China Sea flying into Vietnam. So that was my first real wow, so to speak. But landing in Vietnam, I remember the heat was pretty surprising as how hot it was and dry at that point in time. And I remember seeing Vietnamese civilians walking all over the air base, and I thought that was unusual. I didn't realize that we had hired civilians to work on the base, so that was kind of startling. But we were loaded on trucks, and we were taken to 1st Marine Division, where I suppose we were assigned to regiments. We never got off the truck. We just went on to to regiment, and then we got assigned to, by we I mean there were several of us together coming in country, and we got assigned to different battalions, and then when we got to battalion we were assigned to companies, and then to platoons. And I was assigned to 3rd Platoon, Lima Company, 3rd Battalion, 7th Marines, 1st Marine Division.
What was your rank?
I was a PFC when I got into country.
And your MOS? What job?
I was 0311 Rifleman.
Wow. Dave, just take me into Vietnam. I mean, I don't know where you want to start, but just maybe the first time you encountered the enemy. I mean, what do you remember about that? Where you were, what was the scene like, and possibly anything to do with helicopters?
Well, I don't know where to start. It's okay if I move around.
Yeah, I'll adjust the camera a little bit. You're fine.
Okay.
Did they call you newbies or anything when you're first in Vietnam? I heard these different words.
FNG.
Is that right?
Yeah. Okay. We were on Hill 37, which is like a couple of miles from Hill 55. Hill 55 being where our regiment headquarters were. And 3rd Platoon was assigned to security for a portion of Hill 37 and some outlying bridges on the road that connected us with Da Nang. The first couple of days, we received our gear and went through a short orientation that really was way over my head. But we were assigned to, my first night in Vietnam, I was standing guard duty on a bridge and didn't know what to expect. Feeling really homesick and lonely and scared. Nothing really happened the first night, you know. I mean, it was just the unknown, I think. But from that position, we ran patrols and ambushes in the outlying area. And so I was assigned to a squad, and we started going out on patrols and ambushes, and I started to get a feel for the countryside where I was located. It was on one of those patrols that we drew sniper fire the first time. So that was the first time that I'd been shot at. I don't think I was shot at directly. It was more shooting in our general direction. That was the first time, and it was scary, but at the same time frustrating because we didn't know where they were. And that's kind of how things went in Vietnam. You never knew where they were shooting at you, and you had a general idea where they were, but they'd shoot at you and run. So in the early days, it was all VC, Viet Cong, that we had to deal with.
Why'd they call the enemy Charlie?
Victor Charlie, it's the military.
Viet Cong.
So that was pretty much our routine. There were 2 gun teams in the squad. Initially I was a radio man, and we got some new people in, and I got to give the radio to another new guy. That would seem to have to be the process. You were a new guy, you got the radio. Excuse me. Anyway, I was assigned as an assistant gunner in a machine gun team, and there were 2 gun teams in the platoon, and 3, and we went out on patrols and ambushes daily. And if we weren't doing that, we were on sweeps and operations.
Tell me about just did you ever have to be transported via helicopter in and out of the landing zone?
I'm kind of getting to that.
That's fine. No, there's no rush.
Early November of '67, there's a village right by Hill 37 called Dai Loc. Dai Loc was defended by ARVNs. And there were some Army Special Forces units down in there and so forth. And in fact, I think it was November the 7th, if I remember correctly. Dai Loc was attacked in force. And there was a bridge connecting Hill 37 and Dai Loc, and the VC occupied the far end of that bridge. My platoon sent a reactionary force down there with the idea of retaking that other end of the bridge. I don't know, there was probably half a dozen of us and our platoon leader. And we got down to the bridge. There had been a lot of heavy firing in the village. But where we were at on our side, or the near side of the bridge, there wasn't any shooting going on. So we were in combat formation crossing the bridge when they opened up on us with machine guns and rifle fire. I was probably about halfway across the bridge, and I dropped to the deck when the shooting started, and this enemy soldier who was firing the machine gun could see me and was shooting right at me. And I thought, I've either got to get off this bridge or he's going to finally hit me, because the rounds were hitting all around me. So I just rolled over and fell off the side of the bridge, and I landed in water probably about 2.5 feet deep, something like that. Well, the platoon commander and the other guy who was ahead of me had made it clear across and got down on the side over there. The ones who were behind me went back the other way. In the process, I lost my rifle. Process of going over the side of the bridge. But I made it over where the lieutenant was, and he wanted to send someone back across the bridge to check to see if we had any wounded. Since I was without a rifle, I volunteered to run back across the bridge, and I did. And they shot at me the whole distance back across this bridge, which was probably 60 yards, 70 yards, something like that, across this bridge. Well, I got to the other end, and we had one fellow wounded, and we just basically hollered back across the river to tell the lieutenant we had one wounded, and eventually he and the other Marine came back across, and the firefight in the Ville died down, and the attacking VC withdrew. And it wasn't until after things quieted down that I realized I had been wounded on the bridge from bullet fragments, as they were hitting that close to me on the bridge. But I had them all up and down my back and in my legs, and but it wasn't bad enough to be evacuated or anything. Later in November, we went on Operation Foster, and it was in an area that we called Gonoy Island. I think it also was referred to as the football. And this was pretty much during the monsoon season, so it rained a lot while we were there. We landed in helicopters. We were lifted from Hill 37 in CH-34 helicopters, and were flown out there. And when we landed in a hot LZ. In other words, they were shooting at us as we were landing. So we were all real anxious to get off of this helicopter and get on the ground. I always felt safer on the ground than I did flying in the air in a helicopter, because these old CH-34s leak fuel real bad. So when you were inside of one, all you could smell was the fuel. And so the thought was, well, if they hit it just right, it'll probably catch on fire and blow up, So I was always ready to get out. In landing, they would usually hover above the ground 8-10 feet, and we just jump out. Anyway, we landed in a hot LZ. We were out there for 2 weeks. We'd been in several firefights with the enemy, but they were always withdrawing. I remember we spent Thanksgiving out there, and they brought in hot chow on helicopters to us, on turkey and mashed potatoes and ice cream and so forth. We were all given something to carry because we were going to, after we received all these supplies, we were going to move to another location, and it was almost dark, and we were going to move to another location, set up a perimeter, and then so everybody could eat. And it wasn't raining right then, but as we got in formation to move, we were mortared. We were mortared, so everybody had to take cover. Then after the mortar fire stopped, we moved to another location, and just as they were passing out this hot food, it started raining. So I had soup, basically turkey, mashed potato, ice cream soup for Thanksgiving dinner. So I always remember that. That was quite an event. A few days later, we were set up in a perimeter, taking a rest break and getting some chow. And one of the spotter planes discovered the enemy. And they called in an airstrike. And we were at a distance where we could watch the jets flying in, dropping the napalm and what have you. And all of a sudden we were ordered to saddle up, and we headed in that direction. And as we got closer, we could see that there was a village with I'll call it a stream behind it. The stream was probably not more than 25, 30 feet across, but it was the banks were real steep and deep. At any rate, we were online, and we assaulted through this village under fire. The enemy were in, a lot of them were in spider holes, pop up behind us and shoot at us from behind, so they were shooting from all kinds of different directions. And we came up to this creek. We'd already probably killed a lot of the enemy in the ville, but I think they were delaying us or trying to delay us while the main force got across that creek. Because when we got up to the edge of the creek, they were on the other side shooting at us. There was a trench dug, I assume they dug it along the side of that creek, and we all got down and we were in this trench. They called in an airstrike across from us, and so that it would land where they were. We had air panels. You know what air panels are? It's an indication. They're like red plastic arrows that point to where your position is, so that the pilots can see where you're at as opposed to where the enemy is. We had our air panels out, but this fighter came through and he released too early, and the bomb fell in the creek. Up to my right, I don't know how far it was, but all I remember is the fire from that napalm, and you could hear the kind of a whooshing sound as the fire sucked up the oxygen in the air. Our platoon sergeant ran down the line where we were and telling us all to get back, so we all scurried back to the rear as that blast from that napalm followed the track of that creek. A lot of fellows got badly burned, some were killed in that blast. It was really a bad situation.
Now, was that a friendly fire?
Yes.
Yeah, I've heard of that happening.
But the pilot, I'm sure, was heartbroken or heartsick about it, but we were so close to where they were that I can see how easily it would have been to do that. And, I don't blame the pilot. There was a tremendous amount of shooting going on during this time. When that napalm bomb went off in the creek, the firing ceased on their side, I assume because they were taking cover, like we were. The blast doesn't last very long, but when it's pretty intense and it's really hot.
I want to ask you a question now, as you're talking to me. I asked this to the veterans. I mean, when you're fighting over there, I mean, initially, did you feel invincible, like nothing could happen to me, and then?
Oh yeah, you're 18 years old. You're, you think you can whip the world. You feel like you're, like you say, invincible. It doesn't take too long for after the first time you see someone hit, that goes away real quick. You still feel like you can do your job. I think I was scared the whole time I was in Vietnam, but you just have to overcome that and do your job.
Were you conscious of fighting for God and country, or was it a matter of survival for you guys over there?
Well, we were all, I think I was anyway, initially fighting for God and country. But it didn't take very long for me to realize that I was only fighting for the guys on both sides of me in my unit. That's all I was fighting for after I'd been there for a while, was trying to survive and trying to protect my buddies. The higher stuff was not part of my thinking anymore.
I want to kind of get off the subject of combat just for a second. We'll come back, but because you hear things about Vietnam, but were the drugs used in Vietnam?
The first time I ever saw marijuana was in Vietnam. I never saw anything other than that. And I don't know that there was a lot of widespread use of it at the time I was there. It was later that I started hearing the stories about the heroin but this was after I got back to the States, so I never saw any evidence of really what I call hard drug use over there.
Have you seen a movie that comes close to portraying Vietnam like it was at all? I mean, the movies do justice to that or not?
The closest that I've ever seen to what I experienced, and it wasn't exact, was Full Metal Jacket.
What particular part of that movie reminded you of Vietnam?
I think the scene with the sniper in the building, and it turned out to be a woman. There were a lot of women soldiers with the Viet Cong, and which was pretty, to me it was startling at the time when I observed it personally, but there were a lot of scenes that kind of fairly closely depicted things that happened in Vietnam. Like I said, it came close, but it wasn't real close to what I experienced.
Was there, Dave, was there a strong sense of purpose with you and the troops as to why we were in Vietnam and you know, the purpose of war fighting?
I think so. You know, our purpose was to survive and try to destroy as much of the enemy as we could. We felt like we were winning, and over time you build up a lot of anger and frustration, and somebody said that war is like 95% tedium and 5% pure terror, and I believe that's pretty accurate. If we were able to locate the enemy, I think we took a little pleasure in getting even, so to speak, and trying to destroy them. I know that probably sounds cold, but that was my attitude anyway. But I think we were fighting to survive mainly.
Well, I mean, 18, 19 years old, 20 years old, and you're over there, you know, killing people. I mean, that's not normal teenage living. I mean, it's like, you know, so I'm intrigued as I talk to you about that. And you think it changed you from as a person, better or worse, your experience in Vietnam and the combat and what you had to do?
Oh, I'm sure it did. I have to think about it for a second here. As I said earlier, I didn't know how I would react when someone was actually shooting at me. Even though it's a scary proposition to have someone shooting at you, at the same time you're trained to respond to that. As far as taking another life, early on I felt some guilt over that, and I had to try to find my way through that, you know, and after a while you don't feel anything anymore. You're doing your job, and it's him or you, or him and your buddies, and so you don't feel that. I mean, I don't know why, but that guilt just doesn't come into question. I remember early on thinking about, well, he probably had a mother, and he probably had, you know, and that'll wreck you. And, you know, we talked about stuff like that, and I think that probably helped me get over that. But you never get over what happened to you. You never forget. Some of the things that happened are still very vivid in my mind, you know, all these years later.
What comes to mind when you tell me that? Did you lose friends close to you, wounded, killed?
No, we lost a lot of friends. On that Operation Foster that I was talking about, I lost a friend, Bill Prothero. He was in another unit, but he was. We had made contact earlier that day. I mean, by that I mean he and I ran into each other, and we visited for a few minutes as they were moving through our lines into another position. And that next morning, very early, we got into a pretty good firefight with them, and Bill was killed. Tet Offensive took a lot of lives. Art Ortiz, Jeff McTeer, and several others.
Were you with them at the time? Did you get to help them, or how did that work out? You just heard about it?
Well, I heard about Bill being killed a little later on. But the others, I was there. There's no time to grieve, really. You just have to suck it up, so to speak, and get on about doing your job. Because if you start letting things like that get to you, then you start getting careless. And so you just kept going. Even though deep down inside, I'm sure all of us were grieving over, a lot of guys wounded. Fortunately, they survived their wounds, but a lot of guys dead.
Have you ever been back to the Vietnam Wall in Washington?
Was there this summer.
For the first time?
Yeah.
Why did you go back?
My wife wanted to see Washington, D.C., and we have family living in Virginia. So we spent a week in Washington, saw some of the Smithsonian's, sightseeing, and finally went down to the mall and went to the wall. It's a pretty moving experience when you think about that all those guys never got to live any life other than war. We all grew up in Vietnam. We were most of us just kids, and I would say at 18, 19, you're not even fully developed physically. But we all grew up in Vietnam, and I think it changed us all forever. But those people whose names were on the wall never got to come back home, never got to live any kind of life. Pretty sad.
Did you ever get to help any of the wounded? I mean, you hear stories of, was that up to the medics or the corpsmen? I mean, or did you personally get to help anybody that was wounded?
Well, you have to, They would bring in medevac helicopters, take out wounded and dead, and we'd have to help load them on the helicopters. Excuse me. Someone gets wounded, the corpsman's already really busy if he's still alive, and so you do what you can, but you got to keep fighting because they're still shooting at you, and so it's hard to tend to a wounded person and keep up the fight.
So you're over there for one tour or two tours?
One tour.
Will you count down the days like a lot of the guys do, or is it just a matter of?
I just took it one day at a time, and because every day was might be your last day, So I suppose I knew a lot of guys who were doing countdowns, you know, but they were short anyway. You know, they were down to a month left in country. But it seemed like I had so far to go, I didn't want to think about it, you know. So I was just one day at a time trying to survive, you know, in that hellhole.
So how long did you spend in the Marine Corps? 2 years, 4 years?
I was in 2 years, just right at 2 years.
So was that common at that time? You go in for a year training, then you're in Vietnam for a year, and then you're out?
No, I had enlisted for 4 years. During Tet Offensive, I got wounded again, and eventually was shipped back to the States and discharged medically.
Tell me about your wound that you sustained at the Tet Offensive. Where were you at? What happened?
Well, Tet Offensive was supposed to be a truce. And I was part of a squad that was assigned to be security on one of those remote bridges that I spoke of earlier. Early afternoon or middle afternoon, some of us had been down, and there was a little village nearby, and some of us had been down in the little village, and we headed back to the perimeter to set up our night perimeter on the bridge. And there was a radio alert that they were attacking in Saigon. And so we got our perimeter all set up and settled in for the night in our fighting holes. And we had a above ground bunker on that bridge, and it was made out of wood and sandbags. And we had some new people in the squad. That decided they were going to spend the night in that bunker. We tried to warn them out of it, not to go in there, but they went in anyway. Anyway, by then I was machine gunner, and we set up our gun, and my assistant gunner took first watch, and so I got a little sleep. And he woke me up probably about midnight. And so I was on watch, and there were constantly flares going off, and being dropped from airplanes and artillery shells going off. Not right over us, but near enough around us that the light reflected in a little bit where we were. And I could see that some people had penetrated our perimeter wire and were lying on the roadside in front of my position and the wooden bunker that I was talking about was between me and them. So I alerted the squad leader, and I'm sure they heard us talking because they fired a rocket into that bunker. And we heard the guys in there, of course, screaming and everything. They opened up on us from all different directions all at once. And we were in a pretty close firefight. A second rocket hit that bunker, and one of the guys in there ran out through the doorway and was shot dead right in front of me. I mean, I was only 15 feet from that bunker in my fighting hole. We started using grenades and rifle fire, and eventually they withdrew, but we killed several of them. We successfully defended the bridge we were on, but we took quite a few casualties in our squad. We were all pretty much out of ammunition at that point. If they had pressed the attack much longer, I'm sure they would have overrun us, because we were pretty well spent as far as weapons were concerned. They had simultaneously attacked all of our positions in the area. Regimental Hill was under attack, Battalion Hill was under attack. Our artillery was pinned down by mortar fire, so we couldn't get artillery support or illumination. Eventually, and it seemed like it took a year, but I'm sure it was only an hour or so, because we had the wounded and the dead, and we didn't have a corpsman with us. They come out with an Amtrak and a tank eventually, and brought us more ammunition, and took our dead and wounded out that way. But they didn't reinforce us. We were just left with what few guys survived. And so we continued in our perimeter for the rest of the night, and that next morning we were able to assess our area, and there were several dead enemy around, and so forth. But Tet continued. That wasn't it wasn't just a one-day fight. Tet continued on for weeks.
And you were wounded right then, or what?
No. A few days later, one of our patrols from my platoon was on a patrol during the day, and ran into a sizable force of NVA, and got shot up pretty bad, but were able to radio for help. So everybody who was around joined this reactionary force. We just immediately grabbed guys. A lot of them I didn't even know. I was up on Battalion Hill, on Hill 37 when it happened. We all grabbed our gear and jumped in the back of trucks and headed out there. This area was probably 1,000 meters from the road, and it was a wooded area, heavily wooded area with a river running behind it, so it was a lot of jungle and bamboo and cover in there. And our patrol was just on the outside perimeter of that, where they were pinned down. So we all got off the trucks and started down across this open ground towards where the shooting was. They let us get pretty close. They let us get, 50, 60 yards from their position before they opened up on us. And they opened up on us with machine guns and rifle fire and everything, and we all took cover. A lot of fellows got hit in that initial firing. My buddy Daryl Burkett was badly wounded. Several guys were killed when they first opened up on us before we could get into cover. And we were pretty much pinned down with the rest of them for the rest of that day. I remember a mortar round going off near me, and at one point, and when your adrenaline is pumping that hard, you really don't feel stuff much. You don't know. I remember my ear was ringing real bad, and I felt burning pain in my legs and my butt and my back. We laid out there and it was hot. My God, it was hot and dry, and all the water we had was what we happened to have with us in our canteens. And like I said, we were pinned down there from probably late morning until late afternoon in that heat. I started to succumb to heat stroke. We were some distance from the main, I don't know how to describe this. We were on the left flank when we walked in there, me and my 8-gunner. By we, that's what I'm talking about. And we were on the left flank, and the main body was to our right. And so when the shooting started, we got down behind a rice paddy dike, and we were probably, I don't know, 20, 30 yards from where the rest of the guys were, kind of out on our own out there. We were pretty heavily engaged with them. But at some point I started to succumb to heat stroke, and my assistant gunner drugged me over to where the rest of the guys were, and because they were still firing at us, and they brought in tanks to reinforce us with tanks, and they brought in Amtracs. The Amtracs, amphibious tractors, have a door in the back, in the rear, that opens up, and we all crawled in around the Amtracs and crawled into the back of these Amtracs. Well, the one that they put me in was one that they had been putting all the dead and wounded in. And so the floor was pretty well covered with bodies. In fact, I was sitting on somebody's body inside the Amtrac. About the time that I got in the Amtrac, it was hit with an RPG in the front. It was a glancing round. It glanced off the front, sort of, but it was enough to burn the metal and turn it white. And I think it was just an act of God that it didn't penetrate that Amtrac. It would have killed me if it had blown up inside that Amtrac. Anyway, that's how they withdrew us out of that position we were in. Was the tanks were given covering fire, and we all got in the back of these Amtracs, and they pulled us back out. It was already dark by then. I didn't know until later who the casualties were. I thought that Darrell Burkett was dead. In fact, the corpsman had went over and checked him and thought he was dead. He'd been shot in the head and the chest, or the chest area. But my buddy Scott Reynolds, who was my assistant gunner, apparently went out and to retrieve his body as we were getting ready to pull out, and Darrell moaned when he picked him up, and that's how they knew he was alive. Most of the casualties we had that weren't real bad, including myself, were taken to the aid station on Hill 37. The really bad ones, including Darrell, and the dead were taken by helicopter medevac to Charlie Med in Da Nang. This kind of patrolling, getting in firefights, just really kind of continued for weeks. in a later patrol into the same area, a week, seems like about a week later, got into a similar situation, and the reactionary force goes out. That's when Art Ortiz was killed.
Dave, let me ask a question. We're getting towards the end here. I want to make sure I have time for this, but when you came back from Vietnam, were you received home? I mean, was there a welcome home for you? If not, tell me what happened and where you were.
Well, I was in a hospital, Naval Hospital in Oakland for quite a while. And was discharged from Treasure Island. And I had a friend, or had met this other Marine who was from San Antonio, Texas. And it turned out that we were going to be initially on the plane together. So we kind of just buddied up, and we were taken to the airport there at San Francisco. And we didn't go in the main door. We went in like a side door. There was both sides of this, there was like chicken wire from ground to roof, both sides. And both sides there was nothing but war protesters. And we were in uniform, and we had to walk up this ramp into the terminal. And oh man, they were calling us all kinds of names, baby killer, spitting at us. I don't remember everything they said to us. I was very angry. Anyway, when I got home, it wasn't, my family had turned into protesters, war protesters more or less, and so it wasn't this huge welcome home. It was a lot of questions about, aren't you ashamed of what you did? And there was a lot of that kind of stuff from my family. I already felt a lot of survivor's guilt anyway, and this just compounded it. Needless to say, I was pretty estranged from my family after that. In fact, when I was getting ready to come home from California, I called my dad's house to let him know I was coming home, and my stepmother answered the phone. I told her I was coming home, and her first reaction was, "Don't come home." And I said, and I remember it distinctly, I said, "Well, I don't have anywhere else to go." And she said, "Well, if you come home, don't wear your uniform." And that should have been the warning sign, so to speak, of what I was getting into when I got home. Not everybody was like that, but my family generally was. A lot of the people that I knew in Newton were pretty friendly and pretty supportive. But my family was, being asked if I was ashamed of what I'd done was more than I could take. Hell no, I wasn't ashamed of what I'd done. I served my country. I did my best, and there was a lot of anger. I felt a lot of anger about the way the war was going, the way the politicians were running it. The military didn't lose that war. The politicians lost that war. And so
I got to ask you this before I run out of tape. Describe briefly survivor's guilt. Why you felt like that? What that is?
leaving country, knowing that a lot of your buddies were still there fighting on. Leaving country alive when you know a lot of your buddies didn't. That's what that feels like.
Dave, what does the American flag mean and represent to you as a veteran?
It means everything that's good about my country. It's what the banner we fought under, the banner that we defended, and that our people are still defending. But to me, it means it represents our country, our freedom, everything that's good about America.
What about freedom and the price for freedom? What's your thoughts on that?
It's the price is really, really high, and I don't think a lot of people appreciate the sacrifices that have been made over the years to keep us free and to allow them to drive their cars and go to movies and go on picnics and so forth. There's people still fighting and dying in this new war. And it seems to me that as long as it doesn't directly affect the people who are not in the military, then they are not real concerned with it. It seems like they're just going on about their lives. The people coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan are just as affected by their experiences in that war as I was in Vietnam. And I think that our government ought to step forward and do more to help those people.
We're at the end now. I'm going to ask you to do one more thing that I've asked all the veterans to do, if it's okay. And I understand the protocol of a salute, but for the camera's sake, where you're seated, could I ask you to give me a salute into the camera when I tell you to? Okay. Okay, Dave, right in the camera.